Welcome to our public lecture series. Today we have James Matarazzo and Toby Pearlstein, who will be talking on corporate libraries' bellwether of change. Take it away. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. We didn't expect such a large crowd on scene, which is great. Appreciate that. If you have questions or you agree or disagree with anything we say during our little talk, or if there's something you'd like to share, please feel free to interrupt. We'll probably go off script at some point because Jim especially likes to tell case histories and cases in point, so hopefully we'll end on time, but if we don't end on time, please feel free to excuse yourself and just scoot out behind us as opposed to across the front of the podiums. So this is what we're talking about, and one of the things that Jim was supposed to do, which he neglected to do, was bring copies of our book, which we wanted to shamelessly plug it. But in any case, we'll talk about it a couple of times during the presentation. So in the past few years, we've co-authored a series of articles to assist primarily special and corporate librarians weather an unprecedented wave of closures and reductions in staff, reductions in budget, reductions in space, all kinds of reductions. And these articles led us to publish this book, first shameless plug, Special Libraries, a Survival Guide, which talked about libraries in North America, England, Australia, and New Zealand. And we believe that a lot of the lessons we learned in doing the research for the book and in writing some of the articles that ultimately went into the book can be instructive for all types of libraries. So what we're going to talk about today are lessons that we've learned from our research as well as from Jim's earlier research, and as you probably know, he's been researching corporate libraries since back to the 1980s. Some of the challenges facing academic libraries today, and we'll be focusing on academic libraries a lot, but we think a lot of the lessons learned can be extrapolated to publics, certainly to special nonprofits, to government libraries, corporate libraries, etc. And two particular things that we want to focus on are something called strategic alignment, and I don't know if any of you heard that phrase before? Good. Strategic alignment, and also the whole concept of demonstrating contribution. And we say demonstrating contribution very consciously instead of demonstrating value, because value is a very, very subjective term, particularly in corporate libraries. What's valuable to one place is not valuable to another. What's valuable to one organization is not necessarily valuable to another. So we think demonstrating the contribution that you make to your organization's success is what counts. And then finally, we'll leave you with some key takeaways, because what we try to do in all of the research that we've been doing in all of our writing is be very pragmatic. It's one thing to tell people, oh, this is a great theory, strategic alignment is a great theory, demonstrating your contribution is a great theory, but how do I actually do it? So we'll hopefully give you some ideas and some real-life lessons in how to do it.
Oh.
On to you, sir.
The problem begins in 1909 when John Cotton Dana, who was the business reference librarian at the Newark, New Jersey Public Library, approached the executive committee of the American Library Association in an effort to form another division, since the American Library Association already had ACRL, the Association of College and Research Libraries, PLA, the Public Library Association, the American Association of School Libraries, AASL. John Cotton Dana felt there was a missing link, and the missing link would be Special Libraries Association. The executive committee of ALA turned him down. So the 30 or 40 members that John Cotton Dana represented started their own association, Special Libraries Association. So we have the largest association in North America and the second largest association separate. Different worlds. They don't pay attention to each other at all. Whatever goes on in ALA, ALA pays attention to, and the members pay attention to. Special Libraries Association is its own little group with its own literature. Needless to say, no one connects the two across countries either. It's all just your local information. So Closing the Corporate Library came out in 1982, and that at least shed a little light upon what goes on in corporate libraries. And what I found was, in some cases, the library was needed for a short period of time, usually in conjunction with intensive research. In other cases, the library, which had heretofore not been the subject of close evaluation, suddenly found itself under the watchful eye of the cost cutter, who demanded accountability. Thus, the value of the corporate library was dependent on the immediate need for information services by the organization. When the need was met, the library's value was called into question and its days were often numbered. Now, the rest, at least the rise of online searches, gave many company librarians a new lease on life. They mastered the complexity of database searching and monopolized access to expensive database. Soon, however, databases became easier to use, and many aggregators, database aggregators, offered them for a flat fee on an annual basis. Librarians were still able to keep searching to themselves until they became the bottlenecks in the research process. And the database aggregators, noticing all of this, advertised directly to end users. So starting in 1990, the corporate library was seen in a different light. What we did in 1990 was do a study of senior managers entitled The Value of Corporate Libraries. This gave a lift to the spirits of company librarians, largely because of the way the study was marketed. A marketing genius in the company that co-sponsored this research wrote an inspirational public relations piece that was printed in many trade and professional publications, almost verbatim. But the real message was lost. The major finding of the study was that only 1/3 of the corporate managers surveyed could articulate the value of the library. The other 2/3 didn't know. 3 years later, Tom Davenport and Larry Prusak shook up the corporate library world again with an article entitled "Blow Up the Corporate Library," which appeared in the International Journal of Information Management, and therefore would have been read by people in management. What they found was corporate libraries were being left behind and really increasingly relevant, just as managing information became more essential to corporate success. Dr. Roger Jester, manager of management communications worldwide for IBM, illustrated just how far corporate librarians were in terms of their support. He said, "I find it strange in my 2 decades of experience in a major American corporation that I've yet to see corporate librarians attending any business results or product review meetings. I've attended my fair share of business strategy sessions with colleagues from practically every other corporate function, but I cannot recall a single instance when a member of the librarian's staff was present." Jester categorized librarians as being outside the mainstream of the business they serve. Despite this quote appearing in Special Libraries, the magazine of Special Libraries Association, it's hard to know if anyone actually read it. And judging by the fact that not much changed, it's hard to know if anybody actually acted on the information.
You know, it's interesting, and we use this illustration of silos because in so many corporations, there are all these silos. Each department is their own thing, nobody ever talks to each other. And what really happens in the case of the corporate library, where they have such an opportunity to move across all of those silos and to really understand everything that's going on, because they can become like the traffic hub in a corporation. Frequently they find themselves just another silo along the way, and that's how it becomes very easy to get marginalized. So the idea is not to be in a silo and to try and get yourself into the regular scheme of things. So another blow to corporate libraries occurred in '95 when Jim and Larry, the same people that did the 1990 survey, repeated the survey and talked with senior managers about what were they thinking now. So 5 years after, 10 years after the original studies, there was a 20% decline in the numbers of corporate libraries and fewer staff members in libraries. And still, a theme that's going to become very familiar, 2/3 of corporate managers who they had surveyed could not say what the value of their corporate library was. Without a clever marketing person like they had after the 1990 study, bad news was ignored by anybody but the authors. SLA didn't want to hear about it. They asked for additional funding to keep going with that study, and they were, even though they had won an award for the 1990 study, funding was not forthcoming for a new study or a continuing study. And that's unfortunate for us as a profession. You don't just want to hear the good news, you need to hear the bad news as well. So there's a document called Standards for Special Libraries, which probably not many of you have seen. I only saw it as we were doing research for this article. It's not something I was familiar with. But it typically requires evaluation. You should always be evaluating your library. But few special librarians actually perform them on a regular basis. In the past, and for almost a decade, Jim taught a course at SLA's annual conference on the topic of demonstrating value, and we talked about, again, the difference between value and contribution. Class was always crowded, yet few of the attendees, again, seemed to practice what they learned when they returned to work. It's a mystery why this is, and he was saying, do people read the literature? We don't know. People attend classes, we assume whatever they learned in class they're going to take back and use. But as you might imagine, there are always excuses. I don't have enough time, I don't have enough staff, my manager doesn't care, I don't need to get evaluated, they never ask me for anything. But all of the other functions in a corporate library, in a corporation, are evaluated. Everybody gets evaluated, and somehow the library feels they can escape that because they use as a proxy for success, well, we have lots of customers and they seem happy, or I get a salary increase every year, so I must be doing well. And that's a very dangerous path to go down. Because when a firm suddenly decides to evaluate all of the cost centers with an eye toward getting rid of unnecessary activities, the library has a huge target on its back if you haven't already laid the groundwork for evaluating. Managers in the library often feel blindsided when this happens. Well, you never asked me for any evaluation before. Now all of a sudden you're asking me. I have no data. I don't really even understand what you're looking for. And the manager sometimes doesn't really know what they're looking for except to cut costs. So upper management might not even discuss this with the librarian. They might send it down through a lower level manager who doesn't really feel any qualms at all about cutting out the library. They may not be library users themselves, and even if they are, they probably feel they can substitute something. They have no problem with throwing the library under the bus in order to save their own department and their own staff. It's important to realize, and we saw this in our research, particularly into newspaper libraries and publishing libraries, that users can't save the library in troubled times. No matter how successful your users feel you are, no matter how much of a contribution you make to their success, most users are not high enough up on the corporate ladder to be in a position to save you when an organization is looking to cut costs. Moreover, when costs are being cut, people are trying to save themselves. Everybody's trying to keep a low profile. No one really is going to stick their head up and say, no, save the library, I need that to succeed.
Take my choice.
So this sounds cynical, it sounds defeatist, but it's very practical. You cannot really rely on your customers. I'm not saying they're going to be your enemy, but you can't necessarily rely on them to save you, and you can't use them as a proxy for success. And we've seen many, many instances where that's happened. So more and more now, particularly since the recession in 2008, many firms are making serious and determined moves to limit expenses. The money they save is being used to buy back shares or increase dividends. It certainly isn't being invested in information management. And the money that's not spent on the library or these other services that are considered non-essential can be used to buy another firm, to finance a merger, whatever it might be. So you need to watch out for yourself, and you need to be prepared for what's coming down the road.
The little graphic up there is our representation for the confluence of forces that's squeezing down on every corporate function. Management wants increased revenues. This is a real problem. In this country, and actually in Europe and in Asia, companies are having a really hard time selling more business, whatever they sell, whether it's consulting or whether it's widgets or whether it's whatever. They just can't raise the top line. More business. They want increased profits, and they want reduced expenses. So a lot of the increased profits have been coming from cuts, and there's not much left to cut anymore. The cuts have translated into increased dividends for the shareholders, which they really like, of course, why wouldn't you? It also has led to increased purchase of shares, which by the company, which increases the value of shares. So we've got all these management issues circling around. And right in the middle is sustainability. Can you survive in this environment, which is crushing any excess expenditure of capital? Doesn't really make any difference. Money saved drops to the bottom line. money saved in your department and anybody else's department could lead to having enough money to buy another company as a way to grow. There's got to be a way to grow the top line, to increase revenues. In 2009, Sue Edgar asked the question, is the bell tolling for the death of the corporate information unit? She argued that corporations want to reduce headcount, costs, and scale back and reassess business needs. Edgar noted these were harsh economic times and businesses are changing priorities. And there are casualties as a result. She challenged the information professionals to enter the new economic era. Now, I was struck by a 2013 report which Dr. Pearlstein slipped to me one day innocently. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. I kept rereading it and rereading it. And I decided that after the Bain people consulted with 12,000 corporate executives worldwide, 1,200 corporate executives.
12,000 would be a lot.
I tend to exaggerate. 1,200 corporate executives, they found the confidence levels of these executives down in light of the slow recovery and some new challenges. Their priorities were to repeat and keep beating it in your head. Revenue growth, cost reduction, increased profitability. Now that they had done all that, they were looking for new and creative ways to cut costs. So we have industry in a constant state of turmoil. Now, you would really have to be like an ostrich not to know this, because there's constant repeating of cutting costs. The most blatant occurred just a couple of months ago. The Wall Street Journal needed money to invest in new areas. Well, they couldn't find any money to invest in new areas, so they laid off 150 people. The money that they've saved by laying those people off will allow them to make these new investments that they want to make. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were sacrificed so the Wall Street Journal can grow. And the only way for them to grow at that time was to cut 150 people. That does not cut 150 people out of their out of the library. That certainly isn't the case. It's to cut 150 people at the corporation itself. So, I was at one firm. I was there once a week, every Friday. I appeared one day, and the entire marketing department was let go. I was out of this country in another large company in a huge physical library, and that is in terms of staff and holdings. It was eliminated in one day. The firm decided that they're not going to have any collections, and they're only going to be left with a small staff. That small staff of information professionals are directed to help a very specific customer group. Everyone else is on their own. They have a few databases on their desktop, but they're not going to get any help from anybody in the library. All of the savings through these cuts, and there are cuts corporate-wide, and this is a big firm, 360,000 employees worldwide. All the savings garnered through these cuts from the library and other departments are being put aside for future purchase. They've decided the way to grow is through this one area that they're concentrating in, and by acquisition. Now, I need another slide. It says, alert! This is the time to demonstrate how the library can contribute and communicate that up through the decision makers. How else are you going to achieve support? Are you supporting the goals of the organization? It's time for library management to take the lead and to do its part, whatever is necessary, actually, to influence the decision and to align the library's goals to the organization's goals. If you choose to marginalize yourself by avoiding I got stuck. Or refusing to figure out how you can contribute and make the tough decisions, or give up the space, or utilize the staff differently, your days are certainly numbered. In 2009, as Toby has indicated to you, we started a series of articles in Searcher, now Searcher Online, designed to assist special and corporate librarians at a time when the economy was leading to reduction and closures. The topics range from government to publishing to news libraries, all of which appear to be under stress. We did articles on scenario planning, alternate sources, all with an eye to inform and advise the managers of these libraries in the United States on how they could change. We expanded our coverage to Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, and there are differences in countries. Corporate libraries in the United States are being affected dramatically. Government libraries in Australia and New Zealand are being affected dramatically. It's really interesting to see the corporate libraries surviving nicely and our neighbors to the south, and their government libraries being squished. Anyway, we revised all of this, updated it, and then published Special Libraries: A Survival Guide. The goal was to create a pragmatic set, yet sustainable set of options for information professionals under stress, and for the library managers to become thought leaders in their organization.
We're just going to go back a second, because what I want to underscore in some of the stuff that Jim's just been talking about is this idea of credibility in your organization, and also an idea about flexibility where you go to work and where you are working, the kind of jobs you look for. And we'll talk about this a little more as well. So messages are being sent by management all the time, and the goals that management has continue to shift from year to year, and sometimes they even shift during the year, particularly in a company or an organization that might be in flux or involved in this kind of economic turbulence that we were talking about. In fact, we've talked to people who sometimes report to 4 different managers in the course of 1 year. So you can imagine how trying that is if you're attempting to educate upper management that doesn't really understand what you're contributing to the organization. You have to spend all of this time trying to get them on board, and sometimes they don't really care. I was working on a task force for SLA recently, the Special Libraries Association, and one of the topics of the task force was dealing with disengaged management. That is not an unusual circumstance. Sometimes you can't even get to the upper level management to talk to them about something. So business as usual trumps often for librarians who get caught up in these things. They say, well, I'm just going to put my head down, do the job, do business as usual. I know what my job description is, and that's what I'm going to stick to. If you do that, you're really on this slippery slope that I mentioned earlier. You have to begin looking around for opportunities. How can I take the skill set that I have, not necessarily the job description that I'm doing, but how can I take the skill set that I have and drive it to do something more for my organization that they might really appreciate? So now we will just jump ahead to the idea of strategic alignment. And here's where I was talking about being nimble enough. Sometimes when we're talking about how we think nobody reads the literature, we say no matter how much time people get to make changes, they're simply not nimble enough to do it. They cannot figure out often how to get out of their own way. So Jim talked about when he and Larry Prusak visited this insurance company in Japan, and they said, we're helping the people that sell the business of this company. Everybody else can serve themselves. We'll acquire a collection, we'll acquire databases that can help them, but everybody else, we're on the phone. We're using the databases that help the people sell insurance. Otherwise, what are we here for? And that's the most kind of direct way I can think of to say this is what strategic alignment means. So in 2006, SLA commissioned this strategic alignment study called the SLA Alignment Study. And it really demonstrated, when we looked at the data behind the scenes, they interviewed maybe 700 upper level management, and these were people who weren't necessarily managers of libraries. They were CEOs, C-suite people, they were department heads, marketing, human resources, across a wide spectrum of different kinds of special libraries. There was a significant disconnect between what the information professionals, the providers in this chart, believed were the services they should be providing, and what the customers who were surveyed, the people who held the purse strings frequently, said they actually would want and would find valuable from the library. So really just take a second to look at this. There's 6 different kinds of activities up there that are very common to whatever kind of library you might be in. Almost in every single case, where we, being the providers, are disconnected from what our customers want. Now that doesn't mean that the customers weren't satisfied with some of the things we were doing, but when you have limited resources and you have limited staff, and that looks like it's going to be going down over time, you cannot afford this kind of a gap. You simply can't. You're marginalized, you're reducing your credibility, you are not contributing to the bottom line of your organization. how much of a bigger target can you put on your back as unnecessary activities?
SLA hired two very competent firms and spent between $250,000 and $750,000 to do the strategic alignment study. That's a lot of money. I don't think it'll ever be repeated again. At least no one's going to spend that kind of money to do this kind of study. So it started off with, can special libraries change no matter how much time? They've had three, I think, really hard warnings. So SLA worked with the Financial Times and commissioned a study to explore the value of information in society today. Yet again, 2/3 of the corporate managers in this news study could not say that the corporate library added to the activities of the firm. What messages are information professionals, Special Libraries Association, and special libraries missing? Something must be missing.
Let me just go back to the previous slide for 1 second, because I want to emphasize something here which you might not have said. The whole concept of strategic alignment and being a thought leader in your organization comes down to how do you prioritize what you're doing. In a case of limited resources, there may be 100 services that you think you want to provide, and we'll talk about this in a minute, particularly with reference to academic libraries. How many things can you possibly do? You can't do them all. When I first went to Bain, I came out of a government library where cataloging was really important. When I went to Bain, they cataloged, but that was like the very last thing they did. The most important thing they did was reference and research. So you always have to be thinking about what's the most important thing I can be doing to help the organization sell more insurance. And that's really hard for a library manager to do. It's very hard to say, stop doing these things we've been doing for the past 10 years and let's start doing these, because it might need retraining. It might need a lot of very difficult conversations with people who don't want to do something different. It's a hard thing to do, but if you don't, you're not a thought leader, you're putting your organization at risk and you're putting yourself at risk for sustainability, which is what we've been talking about. So let's talk about academic libraries and reference questions.
It seems to me that it's undeniable that there's been a decline in traditional reference questions. If that's not obvious, if we go from 20 million down to 5 million in the largest research libraries in the United States, that's quite a decline. Now, does everybody think that they're a researcher themselves? Do people not even know that if they come to the library, they will be assisted? What's the problem? The quiet study space that libraries provide on campus will always be there. The other roles and services appear to us to be on the decline. In this light, the challenge is how to invest in and budget for innovation, while not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and continuing some core services. For example, if traditional reference services are really not needed as much, why not move to remote reference services and have clerical staff handle the reference test? This has already occurred in some institution where the virtual Ask the Librarian services have become popular. In the area of collection development, replacing physical materials with collections of e-books may solve the problem, many problems, and reduce the amount of professional time that's necessary. Let me give you another example from our own library. I needed a current issue of a periodical. I typed in the title of the journal, and 7 databases popped up, presumably each containing the journal that I wanted. The first database wouldn't have the current issue until next year. The second database had a similar delay. Frustration got the better of me at that point. I simply Googled the journal. Up popped the title that I wanted, and I was able to download what I needed. What conclusion did I draw from this experience? Theoretically, I probably should have learned through some training session that publishers place certain restrictions on the current issue of full-text journals. Realistically, though, I don't think I should have been bothered with that knowledge. You can see how the typical user would draw the conclusion that everything on Google is simply there. It's my first choice. Actually, it wasn't my first choice, but it became my first choice after that. Here's where the frequent valid question posed by those who control purse strings inevitably gets asked. Why are we spending enormous amounts of budget dollars on various databases when Google Scholar or just plain Google can cough up the information in no time, and with very little effort on the user's part to figure out how to ask the question?
So if we want to translate this into how like a corporate library has to align with the strategic priorities of its organization, let's think about it in the same context in the academic library. So we obviously know the Google situation isn't that cut and dried. It's a complex issue about what people can find themselves and whether or not they can do it in an efficient way. This is where the concept of alignment and driving contribution to the bottom line, and these are tactics that corporate librarians should know a lot about, can assist academic librarians. The ability to articulate the librarian's contribution to the organization's goal, which in the case of a university or a college is graduating well-educated students who know how to use information to make good decisions, becomes really critical for you to be able to do if you're in an academic library. So here's some research from Laura Saunders, who we know very well here at Simmons, where it's illustrated that many libraries who say that they're in line with their organization's priorities really aren't. She looked at 63 academic library plans, but only 17 libraries in those 63 plans specifically aligned what they did with what the school said were its priorities. And that's kind of a frightening circumstance. So I think sometimes people think this is so obvious. Well, of course, I'm the university library. I'm doing what the university needs me to do, without really ever pressure testing what does that actually mean. Because that can change very, very rapidly, as we've been talking about. So, for example, in Jim's situation, making the business case for a better interface that removes the need for the searcher to know which aggregator provides access to what, or more focused mandatory information literacy training, for example, that helps the customer understand when to use Google and when not to, addresses some of these issues in the kind of changing times we're talking about. And we'll actually be talking to Linda Schuler's class in a couple of weeks about the whole idea of information literacy training and how important that is as a core skill for librarians. It's not something I think that's often taught. We teach about usability, we teach about, yes, we have to make these databases available and talking about what the databases are, but we don't necessarily talk about the concept of information literacy, and it is an important one. So the reality is sometimes Google is the best tool, there's no question. It's straightforward, the answer is from an obviously reliable source. In other circumstances, though, without a knowledge of all the available sources and how they vary amongst them, the Googler can well find themselves not getting an answer within the time allotted to them, or they might find an answer that looks really good but is totally bogus, or they can find an incomplete answer and make a very bad decision absent the full information. If you're in a corporate library, that's like a really bad thing to do. In a consulting firm like I worked in, you pass along information that has data relative to an industry, the consultant turns around and uses that information in a client presentation, and the client says, well, wait a minute, that's not really the figures I have from my own research. Very, very, very bad. And if you talk about marginalizing your credibility, that's a very quick way to do it.
Now, maybe at Bain & Company to get another chance at Booz Allen to be fired immediately.
So the academic librarian, like the company librarian, has to make some very tough choices regarding investments in resources to support the ends of the university or the college that they're supporting, and to support the organizational priorities.
I have another great example for you. A colleague of mine works in a corporate library, and he worked with his corporate manager and ended purchases of any full text materials. Instead, he subscribed to an ebook service with 35,000 titles in the subject area that his organization needs. He'll only buy a print item if it's not available as an ebook. And while there was some resistance to this policy from the customers at first, it has subsided. Now, the small library staff can concentrate helping customers with more sophisticated research needs. Also, the space occupied by the library is fixed and likely to get smaller as time goes by. The organization of these materials is no longer an issue. Their circulation is no longer an issue. Their availability is no longer an issue. So, as with any new idea, the manager's support was important. So too at an academic institution. Faculty involvement and support will be needed. As students bear a greater portion of college costs, their input will also be needed. And I think they'll want to contribute ideas. This need to get the stakeholders involved in decision-making, especially what might be considered drastic changes, involved are very typical in a corporate environment. Academic librarians haven't faced these kinds of situations in the past. You can draw then from the corporate library experience. There are going to be trade-offs with all decision. In light of the growing developments in the area of distance learning, the need for digitized collections is obvious to both faculty and administration, especially those students off campus. Academic libraries are going to have to prove value. Now, if that sounds hard, the Boston Business Journal is running a series on academic colleges and universities. Forget the academic, just go colleges and universities. The returns on endowment haven't been that great. Federal funding is down, so the research grants aren't that great. Most colleges and universities depend upon their endowments to provide financial aid and to support other enterprises at the organization. That's going to be harder as time goes by. Many public libraries depend on gifts. If we out there in the field, citizens, don't feel wealthy enough, how much are we going to give to our old alma mater? How much are we going to give to the public library? How much money will we want to spend on public schools by raising the taxes on our property?
You know, it's an interesting question in terms of online education, which is becoming obviously a huge thing. Very convenient for students. It's a real boon to the academic side because they can get students from all over the place now, so revenue tends to go up. I don't think enough consideration is often given to what are the resources that are supporting that, particularly from the library side. So we talked about digitization. Lots of things in ebook form now, lots of online databases. Those can be deployed out to people very, very easily, as long as they meet the minimum requirements. But what if you're sitting in Paducah, Kentucky, and you're taking, let's say, I don't know, some sort of library course here? Well, you have access to a librarian, maybe certain times of the day, maybe 24/7, maybe there's some service that you can use. But what about a library itself? Because the reality is not everything is in electronic form. Not everything that you need to look at to understand the scope of information is in electronic form. So where are you going in Paducah? Do you go to Paducah Public? Do you go to some sort of other business library? Where do you go? And I think when we're thinking about online education, those kinds of considerations get lost in the shuffle. Because you can't say it's equal to what I'm getting in the classroom on a campus where there's a library located. It can't always be 100% equal. I think that's an unrealistic expectation.
Under the umbrella that academic libraries are going to have to prove value, notwithstanding general goodwill towards them. How does the academic library contribute to faculty and student recruitment and retention, for example? And to what extent does the library contribute to student success? While these questions might seem simple and easy answers on the face of things, there is no doubt that in these times of extraordinary competition for budget dollars, and there is a competition at every organization for budget dollars, people will vote against something, not because they don't like it, but just so there's enough money left over for them and their project. Academic libraries have a good deal of tradition on their side. They're often at the geographic center of campus, and many are a source of pride and prestige, not to mention a critical component in the accreditation process. However, online resources have made a considerable dent in their role as a first step for needed information. While students needing a quiet place to study will make good use of any space that they are provided, there are other forces pressing on these libraries. These include the reduced need for physical collection, fewer in-person reference questions, the less need for the organization of information in the usual way. Network resources have changed everything. Many academic libraries are working hard to keep themselves relevant in the digital age. In the past, the pace of change has been slow. Few, if any, question the need for the library as we've known it. However, many colleges and universities now face big challenges in terms of finances, enrollment, and/or relevance of their graduates to the job market. As a result, colleges and universities need to develop strategies. It would seem advisable for the academic library to develop goals to assist the parent institution in achieving its strategic direction.
So, as we talked about, the second kind of theme we wanted to just touch on today, because I know we're already getting tight on time, is the idea of demonstrating contribution and this concept of you are what you measure. For us, a constant theme running through everything we do is if you can't measure an activity, you shouldn't be doing it, because there's no way that you can demonstrate the contribution of that activity to your strategic goals and your strategic alignment. So that's one kind of rule of thumb when you're thinking about prioritizing resources. Can I measure what I'm doing? Now, that's not to say that you should be taking hash marks and checking off every single thing, because there's a lot of networking activity, going out to talking to other departments, that sort of thing that you can't really quantify. But if you're putting resources against something, you should be able to measure it and demonstrate. So lots of libraries have recognized that you need to measure in order to achieve some success. Academic libraries are using things like LibQual+, something that I'm not particularly familiar with, but is apparently a common tool in academic libraries. And the balanced scorecard, which I am familiar with, is much more common in corporate libraries. And this is one example of the balanced scorecard and how it can be used. Are people familiar with the balanced scorecard at all? It's typically a 4-quadrant thing. So we happen to use it this way at Bain, but I recently saw a presentation by a large government contracting company that used it in quite a different way, but the 4 metrics are always the same. You're always looking at what's going on with your customers, what's going on with your internal processes, how efficiently are you deploying your services, and are people effective in using them. You want to look at your own team or yourself if you're a solo librarian and think about, do you have the training that you need? Are you satisfied in your job? Because there's nothing worse than training someone, they stay with you for a couple of years and then they're off to do something else. The biggest advantage in a special library is the experience curve. The farther along the librarians are in the experience curve, the quicker they can answer questions, the better they can advise somebody in when they're doing a good reference interview. They frequently know the business sometimes better than a new employee. So that experience curve can be important. And finally, financially, how are you doing in terms of the resources that you have? What's the return on investment that you are bringing back for all of the things that you've brought to the company? So this is just one example of something like the balanced scorecard, but there has to be some way to measure what you're doing and then to translate the result of that measurement in language that your company will understand and in a way that shows how you've contributed to that company's success or sustainability.
Let me tell you, everybody's after space. A brand name business school recently closed its library. The dean needed space. He's got alumni that want to sponsor things and they need a place to put it. He's got faculty that want decent sized offices and he needs some place to put them. 500 students, 50 full-time faculty. Over the Christmas break, he sent out a survey. 5% of the students returned the survey, 5% of the faculty returned the survey. They don't need the library, gone. All that space is freed up.
You can see how that might be very attractive to the people managing real estate. They might not necessarily consider what other things are being affected by it.
At least they got a chance to vote. At other places, they go away for Christmas break and then come back to half a library.
So there are lots of challenges facing academic libraries today, and this is really, really difficult. Just by putting it up in bullet points doesn't mean that these are situations that are easy to deal with. Where I refer back to this idea of the credibility slide as well. You want to make sure you are as credible a resource and the services you offer are as credible as possible to your organization. So academic libraries and their situation are going to demand clear and concise measures of value, or they're going to face a less than certain future in spite of the tradition that we've been talking about. There are professional and clerical staff in large numbers currently working in a lot of college and university libraries, especially given the increased need for 7-day-a-week openings and many evening hours of service. And in the case of an online program, you may even have to bring in additional services because people are in different time zones. Salaries and benefits of academic units continue to rise in an environment that is already marked by fiscal pressures at the state, regional, and local levels, and the national level as well. These can lead to unprecedented cuts, as Jim was just talking about, and your ability to demonstrate your relevancy to the organization's priorities are critical. It's also a situation where, as I was talking about, there can be difficult personnel situations when you're dealing with a large group of staff in academic libraries, in corporate libraries, even in public libraries where staff tends to be older, they've been there a long period of time. These people don't necessarily want to change. They want to keep doing what they were doing. They have a job description and they're doing what they believe is critical. And this is a point we've been belaboring. They point to all kinds of things that need to be done. We need to digitize the collection. We need digital curation. We need all sorts of information literacy and training. There's all kinds of worthy projects that we want to do. But it's up to you as the library manager, if you will, or even you as an individual, to determine in my 8-hour day or 10-hour day, whatever it might be, what resources am I using, and am I using them to do the most important things? You can't always accommodate everything you want to do. You have to accommodate those things that are most critical to the parent institution.
We don't want this to be a downer. See, management is a contact sport, so academic library leaders need to view all of these ideas in light of the priorities at the local campus. It will not be one model of service given the priorities at the host institution. Higher education is under pressure because of high tuition and little evidence to demonstrate that the product of the institution can find meaningful work at the end of 4 or more ever costly journeys, years of 4 or more costly years in this journey to the degree. It seems to us that all organizations are seeking the same thing. Is this the mantra at your institution? How are you meeting these objectives and still provide needed service? You could wait and be told to make the cuts, or you can proactively form a plan, identify the priorities of service to demonstrate that you are in touch with the major direction of the organization.
Well, and this is very real regardless of what kind of organization you work in. You might think in academia, oh, there's not a lot of competition for funds. The library is so important that there's no question that we'll get funding. Again, a slippery slope. You should, when I was doing my doctorate here at Simmons, I had a committee of people and you had to come in and have an oral exam. I know it's a little bit different now, but I think I answered something by saying, well, there's an inherent value to the library. Dead silent. That was a very valuable lesson, and I learned it a long time ago. There's no such thing as inherent value to the library. The only value is to your organization, whether it's the academy, a corporation, a not-for-profit, a government organization, a public library, whatever it is, there is no inherent value. The value is what you can demonstrate that you're contributing to the success of the organization.
When I was dean of the school, the president asked if he could come over. And I said, yeah, of course, this is your program, it's your school. Of course you can come over. He said, Jim, I need you to cut your budget. I said, I'm not going to cut my budget. And he said, Jim, I'm the president. I said, I'm your dean. My kids are through college. My house is paid for. I owe $129 a month on my car, and I love to teach. So you can spend a few $100,000 to replace me, or you can tell the other deans that that bastard Matarazzo won't cut his budget. So you all have to cut your budget an additional 1%. He did it. What could happen? I could get fired? Well, so what? I got fired. It wouldn't change my lifestyle at all.
Competition.
But there is competition for dollars. That's the whole point of the school. And it's true. It's a true story.
So as we come to the end of what we're talking about, nearly 2 decades have passed since the whole idea of aligning library services with the strategic direction of your host institution was introduced.
The important part of that is it was done for Special Libraries Association. So only those people read it. Nobody else read it. It's a completely separate world. Think of Earth and the Moon. That's my graphic.
No bridge between them. So
And no bridge, yes,
so
thank you.
the lesson that we think for academic libraries is that corporate libraries were very slow to adopt this approach of alignment, and that's a major lesson to learn. if people in academic libraries aren't already thinking alignment, they should be, like, immediately. They need to get into that mindset. Academic libraries need to be nimble enough to meet the new demands that they're facing from administrators, from the student body, and from their professional staff as well. All of these people have a claim to the resources. Librarians are capable of doing a lot of things. Are we asking ourselves the right question, though? Not what can we do, but what should we be doing? And again, we come back to this idea of prioritizing. So last but not least, some key takeaways which we hope you will find useful. And these are kind of geared to a management level of person, but I think they're important to understand if you're working in an organization and your manager needs to be facing these ideas, or if you hope to work in an organization, or even if you're running your own situation.
Is the red schmoo the leader?
The red is the leader, if you haven't figured that out. One of the key takeaways is be a thought leader and step out. Don't just be standing back in the background waiting for things to happen to you. I mean, this is a theme I'm hoping you're getting in every single class you take. Be proactive. Don't sit back and wait for things to happen to you, because that's how you lose opportunities and you wind up being marginalized. So we tell people, brutally analyze your staff and services. Look at every single thing you're doing, from the way you take in a reference request, to the way you process a book as it comes in, to the way you analyze something that you're going to purchase and negotiate for that purchase. Whatever it might be, you have to really put it under the very focused lens. Know who your target audience is and align with it. We have I think, I'll use the word inherent, I guess, we have an inherent bias as people in a customer service occupation. And that bias is we want to help everybody. No matter who comes in the door, we want to give them 100% of our help.
Big mistake.
It's a big mistake. You cannot do that. You will never have enough resources to do that. That's why we give people desktop databases. That's why we train people to do some levels of research on their own, so that we can be freed up to help for the more sophisticated question, to help the people who have the big budgets, to help the bottom line of the organization. Articulate what you contribute. We didn't show you a lot today about that. We talked about the balanced scorecard and Live Qual Plus, but you have to think about ways to take every single thing you're doing and say why it matters to the bottom line. Whatever that bottom line might be, and every organization defines it differently. And finally, you have to be open to new opportunities. And I agree with Jim, this is certainly not meant to be kind of a downer presentation. What it's meant to make you think about is how to take the core skill set you're learning in library school, the core skill set that you're learning on whatever jobs you might have, and actually think about what are the opportunities that that core skill set provides me, and what might it provide a potential employer. I know how to do a lot of different things in information management. Don't think so much about a job description, think a lot about what that core skill can do, because when you go into an interview and you start to talk to people about what you can bring to that organization, it's not that you took a course in database evaluation, it's not that you took this or that course. What is the skill that you learned from that, and how can you apply it to the benefit of that organization? So that's all we have to say today. If you have questions, we're certainly, he's always around. I am not always around, but happy to answer questions by email or otherwise. And we hope you can take some things away that will be useful. If not, sorry, we'll try again the next time. Thanks for coming.
Oh, Jerry has a question.
But first, thank you, Toby.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. I thought this was very interesting. Couple of questions for the students. Everything here coheres to what I've encountered doing consulting downtown, looking at international companies, and it coheres to a lot of organizations. We did a case study on innovation that I want to follow up with you guys about. But out of all the questions one could ask, I want to ask you, how can we communicate? Can you guys direct us, or someone else direct us to you, how to communicate to these other levels? Because some of these projects are innovative and more traditional, but if the other party above you doesn't want to listen to your value statement,
Right.
how do you get it up there?
Yeah, this whole idea of dealing with a disengaged management, and you know, if libraries have been cut back, you can assume that those cutbacks have gone on through middle management and all the way up to the top, and it is often very difficult to create an environment where even you meet with your boss on a regular basis, assuming that boss is outside the library, that you meet with that boss on a regular basis. I think it's difficult. It's different in each organization. One is you have to have the information readily available. and often in a number of different formats. So maybe you send your boss an email that says, I just wanted to let you know these are the 6 things we've accomplished in the past 3 months, and here's how I helped a case team sell a piece of work much more quickly, therefore saving X amount of dollars based on the hourly rate of the case team. And that means that you have to make friends with people in other departments. You have to get out of your bailiwick and go talk to the head of finance. Sometimes that's your boss is the head of finance, but talk to someone who can help you understand where you sit in the context of the organization and how what you do actually matters in dollars and cents. So thinking about periodically corresponding with someone, asking someone, can I have coffee with you once a month? Can we go to lunch once a month so I can just update you on what I've been doing, or if there are things you need to tell me? Just as much as you're squashed for time, they're squashed for time. So you have to really figure out ways to fit yourself into whatever might be a free time. We talked a lot in the past and in the literature about the idea of a champion in an organization, and that's really, really important if you can find one. It doesn't have to be your boss. It just might be someone who knows their way through the vagaries of the bureaucracy you work in. Not saying it's a government, but any organization is a bureaucracy. That person can help you figure that out.
Very quickly.
Yes, sure.
That you mentioned that. At Price Waterhouse, when I worked there, they actually had 2 VPs who were the librarians.
That's the ideal circumstance, that the library is situated in a place where they have access, they have a seat at that table already at the decision-making seat. Obviously not true in every organization, but it can be. When I was at Bain, I was a global director, but I still worked for people that were 3 levels down. And they were all champions for all of their own units, but particularly for information because they knew it was so important to the firm. So those people could always be called upon to go into a meeting with me or look at my presentation, whatever I put together, and say, okay, don't say that, don't say this. And a lot of it has to do with something as simple as how do you construct a powerful email. It's not the same as writing some sort of big prose report. These are the 3 things I'd like to tell you, bullet, bullet, bullet. If you have questions, please contact me. Or these are the 3 things that I found in the research you asked me for. Here's a link to 20 other things that I found that you might be interested in. But the message immediately up front, getting the attention of the person you're trying to get to, is a very positive thing. Does that help? It's a quick answer, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, just had a question. Are there any case studies or like tangible examples of a corporate library that was in trouble that then demonstrated value and like turned itself around or something along those lines?
No. I mean, the case studies that I have on corporate libraries, they didn't demonstrate value. They didn't evaluate anything. Then some companies don't evaluate anything until there's a new boss, and then suddenly everything's being evaluated.
That's true. Look at Ian Cullen.
Yeah.
Ian Cullen, C-U-L-L-E-N.
She's at Emory.
Emory.
Yeah, she's incredible. Anything that she's written, I would read. Yeah, the challenge in corporate libraries is when a company makes a decision to close, you probably cannot save yourself. It's already too late.
Right.
And that's kind of a downer message, but that's the truth. That's why something like keep your opportunities open is important. You should, I'm not suggesting that you should always be looking at the place to jump, but you should know the feeling of what's going on in your organization, and as Jim would tell you, you should be reading the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times and the Economist to understand what's happening in the industry you're in, what's happening in the country and your state, whatever it might be that could affect the funding or could affect the way decisions are made. That's why I say sometimes you're already lost if you haven't been evaluating. No one may ever want to look at anything you've done, but you should be doing it, because if somebody comes and says, okay, I need to know what you've done for us in the past month, and you have to say, well, wait a minute, I need a couple weeks to put this report together, it's easy to say
Look,
cut.
Macy's is not hiring as many people for the Christmas season because they don't think you're going to spend any money. Hewlett-Packard is laying off 30,000 people. It's not pleasant out there. So what are you doing in anticipation of the fact that, for example, if you work here or any other academic institution, the alums aren't going to give us much this year? And what impact will that be down the line on scholarships and money to spread around the campus?
Well, and that's why thinking about things like alternate sourcing or scenario planning are really important skills to develop. Because you want to be thinking, that's why we talk about being a thought leader. You may never be called upon to use those concepts or those ideas, but if you are, you should be ready. So in scenario planning, it's the what if question. What if tomorrow my company is bought by another company? What if tomorrow my company is divested from the parent firm? What if tomorrow the public library I work in loses 20% of its budget? These what if scenarios are the kinds of things you should always be thinking about. And if you work with a team, you should be having regular sessions with that team saying, okay, what would happen if we lost 3 positions tomorrow? What would happen if blah, 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 whatever it might be. And in the case of alternate sourcing, otherwise known as outsourcing, it's really important that you as a manager, or you as even an individual running a particular service in a library, understand if this is taking up so much of my time that it's really eating into something else that I need to do that's more important, who else can accomplish this task? Maybe it's a clerical person in the organization you work in, maybe it's a temp, maybe it's insourcing to a lower cost or other part of your organization, maybe it's totally outsourcing, whatever it might be, thinking of an alternate way to get that task done, so that's fine, that's out of the way now, I'm freed up to do something else.
I'm a trustee of a public library. The town manager took the whole budget one day. Oh, gone completely. We had to figure out another way to fund the library. We raised the money.
So in a corporation where the researchers are experts, or maybe they think they're experts, and they are not coming into the library because they think they're doing research well enough.
Oh, you mean the end
users,
user,
yeah,
customers, whatever, yeah.
The customers. How do you actually evaluate their information literacy if they're not coming in at all? And then how can you say that there's a research need because they're not coming in?
No, it's a really good question, because sometimes you might not know that that's what's happening. I think it really behooves you to get out and be talking to managers. In the case of Bain, for example, where we were a team-based system and every consultant team had a manager, you could kind of, not in a scheduled way, go in an informal way, go around and talk to managers and say, are the people on your team getting as much as they need? You can often hear organizations talking about embedding their librarians. We would assign a librarian to each case team, and it took a long time to get that in place. It wasn't readily accepted. But then that person went to the case team meetings, and so they could hear what everybody was talking about, and you could hear when a consultant didn't know what they were doing, or wasn't using a resource correctly. And it's also important to kind of centralize the resources. So as we mentioned earlier on in the presentation, there are vendors who can be very unscrupulous and can go into your organization and try to sell to everybody and their brother. And if someone has the purse string in a particular department, or even on a case team where they have a case code they can use, they're liable to buy something and they'll just deal with that vendor. That's something you can't control. Then it's up to the manager to say, wait a minute, what'd you spend $5,000 on? Don't we have that in the library? Setting up training classes for every new employee that comes into the firm, so that they know these are the basic things we can help you do, these are the things we expect you to do yourself, we can provide you training, we can give you cheat sheets, we can do whatever it might be. That can be one way to do it. You're never going to find out every possible crack in the finely tuned machine of information services, but you would hope that if you have the right credibility, and if you've gotten out to new employees so that you're building that credibility over time, that they will recognize that you will help them. And there were many, many instances where our librarians made huge contributions to a case team only to have the consultant say, oh yeah, that was me. You know, what library, you know, we know, but, you know, those are just things you deal with on a personal level. But it's your job to make the rest of the company look great, to sell work faster, to be more efficient, to have repeat clients, to be whatever it is that you need to be. It doesn't matter whether you get the recognition. It will eventually come, just because you will have been finally recognized as being part of that success story, but it's not always the case.
You've been a small but powerful audience. Let's let you get on with your life.
Yes. Thanks very much for being here.